Amid the COVID-19 crisis in 2020, it's worth remembering that this is still an election year. What will that election look like with mail-in ballots, new voting machines, and a series of other complications across Pennsylvania and the country? John Cole, the managing editor of PoliticsPA, joins us to break down those questions and more. That's all coming up right here, right now. I'm Sam Chen, and this is Face the Issues. Good evening and welcome to Face the Issues. I'm your host, Sam Chen. Amid all the chaos of 2020, it's worth remembering that this is still an election season. And with mail-in ballots, with the new voting machines in the state of Pennsylvania from the last general election, and with debates across the state and the country over the election and how we vote, there's a lot of uncertainty and a lot of question marks as we head to November 2020. John Cole, the managing editor of PoliticsPA, joins us as we break down those questions. John, welcome to the show. A little bit different format for you, but welcome back to Face the Issues nonetheless.
Thanks for having me as always, Sam. I know a little different that I'm not in the Lehigh Valley, but you know it's always great to be back.
Yeah, it's good to have you, and we certainly look forward to having you in studio sometime soon, as we all pray that the pandemic the worst of it is over. John, let's talk about 2020. You know, the funny thing is, when we started this season of Face the Issues, you and I had this conversation, and I remember saying that 2020 is going to be jam-packed with a presidential impeachment, with the 2020 Olympics, with the presidential elections, and my goodness, we did not anticipate half of what was coming to us. And certainly, as the year started off crazily with the Iowa caucuses and the debacle that occurred with the Iowa Democrat Party, I think as so many of us forget, was still this year. And here we are in June with the Pennsylvania primary just occurring. I want to ask you, just start by asking you about the Pennsylvania primary and some of the changes that have come to Pennsylvania electoral politics. First up, the presidential primary for us is usually in April, but we just had that primary election in June 2nd. What was the rationale behind pushing it back?
So again, like you mentioned, the last time we talked, we did not know what the circumstances would be. So of course, like you mentioned, the Pennsylvania primary was slated to be in April, as it usually is. Pushed back, I believe it was 6 weeks is what the governor and legislator agreed on. But Pennsylvania is not alone. A lot of states decided that they were going to push back their primaries and caucuses due to the coronavirus pandemic, because there was a concern, I guess at the height of it, of people voting in person. Mm-hmm. And that kind of also leads into the biggest storyline of the Pennsylvania primary specifically, which happened on June 2nd, was mail-in voting. Even though at the time of June 2nd, numbers in Pennsylvania were steadily declining for the coronavirus in most parts of the state, it was still to the point where a lot of voters decided to cast their ballot ahead of time through mail-in voting. Now, that's Pennsylvania is not alone in that as well. Several other states in the country decided that they need to have another form of voting so people feel comfortable that they still want to exercise their constitutional right to vote. But at the same time, if they don't feel comfortable enough going to the voting booth, they are able to do so by mailing it in. So that's ultimately the story of the Pennsylvania primary. And it's pretty evident that it was rather popular, specifically among Democrats, where the Philadelphia Inquirer did a study recently breaking down the unofficial results. Mm-hmm. And over 1 million Democrats in the state of Pennsylvania sent in mail-in ballots, which is a very significant number. Republicans were just shy of 400,000. I believe it was an estimated 397,000, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer. But point being, even when you combine those together, of course, the Inquirer being twice as, or not the Inquirer, I'm sorry, the Democrats having twice as much is really noteworthy. But those numbers combined, it shows that mail-in voting was it was the story of the PA primary. That also coupled with the fact that it's incumbent upon each county for when the votes get tabulated. And some counties got their votes in relatively quickly. In Allegheny County, which is the second most populated county in the state, they had a rather significant number of mail-in votes, and they got theirs done in a very timely fashion. And races were called there pretty quickly. And then you have on this side of the state in Philadelphia, in the most populated county, they didn't tabulate those mail-in votes as fast. And there was quite a few races in Philadelphia that weren't called for days, if not weeks after the primary was said and done. And that's something that, again, we can go into later in the show. Well, that will be a storyline for the general. But for the primary, the biggest stories in Pennsylvania was how popular mail-in voting was, specifically among Democrats, and how certain regions of the state, they really shined through this process. Yeah. They were able to get their votes in a timely manner, and it was relatively clean and great. But then again, at the same time, unfortunately, there was other regions where, even though I think it doesn't seem as though there's rife with fraud, it's not as if we're having those issues. The problem is more so that it took so long.
Sure.
And I think it will certainly cause unrest among some voters, specifically leading into the pivotal 2020 presidential election.
Yeah. And I want to get more into that. First, John, I mean, you're a Philadelphia native. How difficult is it conceding to the Pittsburgh area that they were better at this?
It's not easy, but, I have my journalist hat on. I'm going to try my best to give credit where credit is due, Sam.
Sure. Well, it's okay. I mean, I guess that's a consolation prize for them not having Wawa, right?
That's a very good comeback, and I like that. And yeah. I will not see ground on an Eagles debate or an Eagles, Phillies, Flyers, and of course I know the basketball team.
Yeah, anyway. Fair enough. We're going to hear it from our Western PA friends after this episode airs. John, let me ask you this. The mail-in ballots, explain the idea of the mail-in ballot for a moment here. Pennsylvania does have absentee ballots. We've always had those. But the mail-in ballot is more accessible, right? In the sense, like, who can apply for a mail-in ballot? And are they continuing to do the mail-in ballots for the fall general election in 2020?
So the mail-in ballot is relatively new. It's part of election reform that was passed I guess it was passed in the past year or so among between Governor Tom Wolf and the Pennsylvania state legislature, where, again, it's been known as no excuse mail-in ballot, where previously, like you mentioned, with absentee ballots, you needed a reason why you can't go to the polls. Like, why can't you be present? So you had to give a reason. For mail-in ballot, it's no excuse. If it could be anyone. It doesn't have to be just a senior citizen or those who are in the highest risk category for the coronavirus pandemic, which I believe a lot of seniors decide to mail in votes. Sure. And those who are in a higher risk category, they figure, what's the point of me going to the voting booth when I had the luxury of being able to do this process through my home? And I think, again, Democrats specifically really pushed this, the option of mail-in voting. Republicans in the state were in a tough position on this. And here's why. The state party for Republicans were trying to encourage people to vote by mail-in ballot, and understandably so. Why? The issue is that President Donald Trump has been a known critic of mail-in voting. He has his issues with that form of voting. And point being, President Trump still remains popular in the Republican Party, where a lot of Republicans will take his lead. That's not everyone, of course, to say that's not fair to say, but a lot of Republicans are willing to say, hey, if President Trump recommends voting in person, I'm going to follow suit as well.
Sure.
But point being, mail-in vote, again, it's no excuse. So it doesn't have to be just one person. It could be anyone. It doesn't matter your party affiliation, specifically for the general. You can be a Democrat, Republican, independent. Doesn't matter. You can vote by mail-in vote. And it's expected that it's going to be more than the primary. And that's going to be even a bigger storyline as we go to November.
Oh, sure. And John, you said this is part of an election reform package. So this is not just in response to the COVID crisis then. So this is something that's here to stay in Pennsylvania?
That is correct. Absolutely. And I think it's basically, I've said this in other interviews with other outlets, that the days of finding out all the results on election night are like gone for the most part. It's just that, and again, I understand why, even though some counties are slow, not just to stick up for them, but you want to make sure you get it done correctly. You don't want to just get it done hastily and realize there's a ton of mistakes. So I think in theory, the primary was kind of the test run for the general election. Not that the primary is not important. There were several races, specific primaries, that were really important. Incumbents losing seats in the state legislature, one competitive primary for the Democrats or statewide for Auditor General. There was important races, but having said that, November is the big test. I think the primary that was June 2nd was kind of the test run in Pennsylvania.
Yeah. And to your point, there are still counties, I mean, at the time of our taping here on June 19th, there are still counties that either are counting or have just wrapped up counting mail-in ballots. This is almost 2 weeks after the election. Is this something you expect to see in the fall, or do you expect counties to get better at this as this goes on?
I think it's a twofold answer. That I expect there's going to be a more of an influx of mail-in voting in November, because I imagine those who did it for this past primary, they probably feel comfortable enough with it. They realize I really doubt all these people, again, over 1 million Democrats and just shy of 400,000 Republicans, according to the Philadelphia Inquirer, that sent in mail-in ballots. I have a tough time believing a significant amount of them are going to say, wow, you know what, that wasn't really inconvenient. That was really inconvenient. I'm going to go back to the voting booth. I think they realize there's a comfortability with it. And I think, if anything, if they had no problem with it then, if anything, I can only see this growing. And there's more time. There's also, from now until November, we're going to have more time for people to get the word out there about it. I mean, mail-in voting is a relatively new concept in Pennsylvania. I think a lot of people who aren't passionate about following politics and weren't even exactly aware of mail-in voting. So this is a newfound thing in Pennsylvania, and I think for the most part, people realize that most people seem to enjoy voting that way. Those who decide to do that, and there's going to be more people. There's going to be a higher turnout in the general as opposed to the primary. So it only makes sense it's going to be higher. And then to your second part of that answer is that we don't have a specific answer yet if it's going to be faster. But one thing's for certain. Certain counties in the state are going to have to figure out a way to get it done a little faster, just because the amount of people that are going to be wondering what's going on for a week, 2 weeks after the election, that will certainly leave a lot of people scratching their head about the results of the presidential election. Having said that, again, I don't think we're going to know everything on election night, and that's fine. You want to make the thing that's most important is that it's done safely and correctly. But at the same time, I think most people on both sides of the aisle will agree that you don't want to go weeks without knowing who captured the pivotal state of Pennsylvania for the presidential election and, of course, other key races in the state.
Especially if Pennsylvania becomes the deciding state and for Pennsylvania to be sitting out. Last question before we go to the break. Real quick, John. The governor extended the deadline for mail-in ballots in a number of counties in the primary. Do you see this happening in the general?
Again, Sam, unfortunately, it's too early to tell as of now. So Governor Tom Wolf did extend mail-in voting for 6 counties, a few of them in the southeast. I believe Erie County was one of them, Allegheny, Dauphin. But they were high-populated counties, and there were a significant amount of votes that were coming in later. But again, each county is unique the way they tabulated the results and the time they got it out by. We'll have to see in November. Right now, it would not be I'd be lying if I had a specific prediction if you'll extend that voting.
And to your point, as Tip O'Neill said, all politics is local. So we'll have to see what happens. John, thank you. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. John, thanks again for joining us. And, we left off talking about mail-in ballots. To your point, this is probably the biggest story of the 2020 elections, at least here in Pennsylvania. So far as 2020, I'm not willing to say anything's going to be the biggest story yet. One of the situations that occurred, and we talked about at length here on Face the Issues, at the end of 2019 in the general, Pennsylvania was ushering in new voting machines for this cycle. And a number of counties, including Philadelphia and Northampton County, decided to test them in 2019. And there was certainly a debacle in Northampton County and a few issues across the state. To your understanding, I mean, this is something that's not gone away. It's just been overshadowed, right, by 2020. Do you see this potentially being an issue in the fall?
It may be an issue, Sam, but I think people's focuses certainly have shifted, where that was the big discussion in 2019. But I think it really wasn't talked about much at the most recent primary because there was such an influx of mail-in votes where a lot of people, again, a significant amount of people are deciding if I don't need to go in person, I won't. So I think that kind of alleviates some of the pressure of what could be issues at the voting booths. So again, from what we know, that very well may be an issue in November. But having said that, that was not the story in June specifically for the most recent primary.
Yeah, fair enough. I want to talk a little bit about the primary results. Obviously, we can't cover every race in the time that we have, but Pennsylvania, as you know, John, is going to play a keystone role, if you will, in the fall elections as it did in 2016. You look at the primary results, and obviously in the Republican Party, there's always what they call an establishment versus Tea Party angle. In the Democrat Party, there's a progressive versus establishment angle. Senator Sanders, Bernie Sanders, who had run for president and was on the ballot, had endorsed a number of candidates across the state. The results of the primary, what stood out to you, and do you see that potentially impacting what might happen in the fall?
So it is interesting, Sam. Former Vice President Joe Biden was basically the declared Democratic nominee for quite some time, even though he didn't reach the number of delegates until in the past few weeks, actually, is when he officially reached that number. But Senator Bernie Sanders dropped out of the race a while ago. when he realized there exactly wasn't a path. There were states he was winning in 2016. He was losing to Biden in 2020.
Right.
And I guess his path to victory was not there. Having said that, he was still on the ballot. And a guy like Senator Bernie Sanders still has a passionate following in certain regions of Pennsylvania. Even though Secretary Hillary Clinton won PA in 2016 by around, I think it was 11 or 12% over Sanders, his name brand and name recognition has gone up since then. So again, he's known by a lot of people in Pennsylvania, as opposed to 2016, he wasn't as well known. And the progressive movement that he has built is still significant in certain regions of the state, specifically the Philadelphia area and the Pittsburgh area. Senator Sanders endorsed 4 candidates that were running for state legislature in Pennsylvania, and all 4 of them declared victory and won, which is significant. And a couple of them beat incumbents. The first race that was called from a Sanders-endorsed candidate was Nikhil Saval. Saval is one of the co-founders of Reclaim Philadelphia, the pro-Bernie group, and he also has a background in journalism. He defeated incumbent State Senator Larry Farnese in the 1st District in South Philadelphia. Farnese had establishment backing. He had Governor Tom Wolf supporting him. This is a guy who, again, had establishment support. But that district has changed. The demographics of the district has changed. It's getting more progressive, whereas Saval won relatively quickly, where the Associated Press called that, I think, the morning after the election. And that's, mind you, that's impressive considering lots of races in Philly weren't called for a week or 2 after.
Sure.
So that was the most high-profile one. Another state Senate race in which Senator Sanders signaled an endorsement was for Amanda Capoletti in the Philadelphia suburbs. She defeated embattled State Senator Dalen Leach. I think that race is a little more unique because that's not just about Sanders endorsing. It's a different storyline with Leach's past. But then there was 2 other state house races as well, where he endorsed State Rep Summer Lee in Allegheny County. She defeated an establishment Democrat in 2018 to rise the ranks as one of the more progressive candidates. She was one of the progressive storylines in 2018. In 2020, this time around, she was the one in office with a not progressive challenger. She had more the establishment challenger and Chris Rowland. And he had backing from like Rich Fitzgerald and some of the unions out there. And Summer Lee won with relative ease as well. And then the last one as well was another Democrat as well, Rick Krajewski in Philadelphia. He claimed victory over longtime incumbent state rep James Roebuck, who is another Philadelphia rep. He's been in office for a couple decades. And it was a 4-candidate primary, but for a while it looked close. Krajewski really pulled out at the end. He's another Bernie-endorsed candidate where, again, Bernie won 4 for 4 in the primary. So although Sanders, he was on the ballot, but of course Biden won handily in the primary. But the candidates he endorsed, there's still some progressive momentum in certain pockets of the state. Even though Biden was the popular candidate who, again, captured the nomination with relative ease, there's still regions of the state where Bernie's message and people who really support him, it's still received very well, and those people are rising the ranks where they'll be in elected office too.
John, do you think that impacts Biden's chances in Pennsylvania, positively or negatively? I mean, on the one hand, you say, look, there's a lot of enthusiasm among the Democrat Party. On the other hand, we both know that there's always debate on whether or not that Bernie Sanders, more progressive wing, will step up. I mean, the senator has endorsed Vice President Biden, but there's always that question of his supporters will. And you certainly, I mean, social media is no gauge, but you certainly see from social media posts, many of them are very vocal that voting for Vice President Biden is not an option. Given that their performance in the primary, do you see this helping or hurting the vice president in the fall?
I think it's a bit early to tell, although I will say this. Certainly from social media, you would get the idea that, oh, wow, a lot of Bernie Sanders supporters saying they're not voting for Biden. It was Bernie or bust was, the saying. Having said that, it's also worth taking into consideration. I like telling people this in politics where you can't look at social media as the only gauge of what the voters think. I read a really interesting Politico article about former Vice President Joe Biden's chances for winning the nomination. This was in December. So this was before any primaries took place, before the caucuses. And people were saying, oh, well, Biden has no support on social media. He's not winning the young people. How can he possibly win in today's Democratic Party that's certainly growing left? Again, the Political article mentioned a statistic which stays with me to this day. Less than 25%, I believe it's 21 or 22% of the country is only on Twitter. Wow. So you're talking about 78, 77, 76% of the country is not on that social media. So even on Twitter, it may seem that a lot of these Bernie people say they're not going to support him. There's a lot of people that are not on social media that's not looking at that. And I think ultimately the difference also is, sure, there will be Bernie supporters that will not vote for Biden. But I think there are a small faction of them. I think the biggest difference between 2020 and 2016 is that, one, it's for Democrats that are riled up now, President Donald Trump has been in office for 3+ years now.
Sure.
So they have something they're running against. In 2016, they weren't running. They were running against Trump, the candidate. And he didn't have a record to run on. Now they have a record to run on. And most Democrats are united, certainly, in this fight against Trump. Republicans are mostly united behind Trump, too. But it's certain that Democrats are pretty much united behind him. So I would say most Bernie supporters will line up behind Biden. But there will be I think a faction of those people that won't support him, but it'll specifically be important in battleground states like Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin. It could be enough to tip the election in those states, but it's still too early to tell.
Sure. And again, I mean, we are in the Keystone State, and that's also true in politics. John, I want to ask you a little about the congressional map here. Obviously, some of our states, our seats are relatively safe. And you think about Congresswoman Houlihan or Congresswoman Dean, who or Scanlon, who are in safe seats. But they're probably the three seats that really stand out to everyone is Congressman Fitzpatrick, Congressman Perry, and Congressman Lamb. These are the three seats that have gotten national attention. How do you see those shifting in 20? Does that impact the presidential race, or does the presidential race impact those seats?
I think the presidential race does impact those seats in the sense that we'll see if there's if there's enough enthusiasm between either party, it's certainly going to have a down ballot effect. Okay. Will it be enough to change the election? We don't know that. We can start with the first district, though. The first district's probably the most unique, which is in Bucks County mainly. That's Representative Brian Fitzpatrick, the Republican. Fitzpatrick is a name well known in Bucks County. He won in 2016 for the first time. He won re-election in 2018. His brother, the late Congressman Mike Fitzpatrick, who sadly passed away recently, he held that seat for quite a few terms. The Fitzpatrick name is well known in Bucks County, and Fitzpatrick's unique, and so is Bucks County in the sense that Bucks County is trending blue, but Fitzpatrick's not a traditional Republican in the Trump era. The Lugar Center at Georgetown University rated Fitzpatrick as the most bipartisan member of Congress, actually breaking a record for the bipartisan ranking. But you kind of have to do that in a district like the first in Bucks County. You can't exactly tie yourself too closely to Trump because Trump narrowly lost that district in 2016, and Fitzpatrick still won. And just from the polling we're seeing as of late, Bucks County right now looks like it's certainly going to former Vice President Joe Biden by even larger numbers. And just to point to another thing before we go to the other races, Bucks County is known for splitting tickets. Now, I'm not saying that means Fitzpatrick's guaranteed for another term, but in 2018, Governor Tom Wolf and Senator Bob Casey both won by comfortable margins in Bucks County, and Brian Fitzpatrick still won against Democrat Scott Wallace. This time, Fitzpatrick's facing a different Democrat, in Christina Finello, an Ivy Land Borough councilwoman. Again, she had a strong primary performance. She handily defeated her opponent, where Fitzpatrick, surprisingly enough, had a little trouble with his pro-Trump candidate challenger. Fitzpatrick still won by close to 20, but that was kind of closer than most people thought. Point being, though, Fitzpatrick has the upper hand in that. Even though the district is shifting towards the Democrats, the Fitzpatrick name brand's well known. He's voting, I don't want to say 100% accordingly because that's subjective to how I guess you lean, but he's certainly, again, he's been known as pretty bipartisan, and he's got a pretty significant war chest where he has a lot of cash on hand, a lot of cash in the bank to spend for his election, where Finello does not have a lot. And I think that's certainly that's something that scares Democrats in a district that on paper seems feasible, but the Fitzpatrick name brand and the money certainly help him.
John, let me ask you about the Scott Perry, and quickly, wrapping up here in a minute or so here. Let me ask you about the Perry DiPasquale race. That's probably the most watched race right now. How do you think that turns out, and what impact do you think that has on the presidential election, or vice versa?
Okay, so the race in the 10th district around the Harrisburg area is truly the biggest toss-up in the state right now for congressional races, not just from me, multiple outlets, the Cook Political Report. There's several outlets that have this rated as a toss-up. Scott Perry, the incumbent, used to represent a more conservative district. After the lines got redrawn, it's not as conservative. That area is kind of trending blue a bit. Eugene DiPasquale, who is the state auditor general, has the name recognition. Two-term incumbent there statewide from York County, and he distanced himself from the far left wing of the party because that's not going to play well there. That's the true toss-up, and I guarantee you the NRCC and the DCCC are going to invest a lot of money into that race because that is truly one of the battleground congressional races, not just in PA. It's probably the congressional race in PA, but one of the biggest in the whole country.
Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to watch. John, thank you for that. Don't go away. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Face the Issues. John, thank you again for being with us and for the insights, as always. I want to close by asking you, of course, we're heading into the Independence Day weekend, and you are a proud son of Philadelphia, our nation's first capital. What does Independence Day mean for you, and what reflections do you have on it?
It truly is a special day, not only just for us, everyone in America, but I think having been born, raised in Philadelphia and spent my whole life here, it's a significant day where under usual circumstances, people are out on the streets congregating, and you see fireworks everywhere. It may be a little different this year, but outside of the circumstances of the coronavirus pandemic and such, it's still a truly special day in Philadelphia, where I'd recommend for anyone in Pennsylvania, if you have the chance to spend the 4th of July in Philadelphia at some point, do so. There's a special energy, I believe, in this city. I really love the city all the time, but specifically on the 4th of July, it really is a special day here.
John, I think that's such a great reminder. The birthplace of our nation's independence, right there in Philadelphia. And certainly I've been there for the 4th. And as you said, if you can be there for the 4th, do it. It's a great opportunity. John, thank you again for joining us. That is all the time that we have tonight. I want to thank John Cole for joining us and sharing his insights. And we want to wish all of you a very happy and safe Independence Day. On behalf of all of us here at Face the Issues, my name is Sam Chen, wishing you a happy Independence Day. Thank you and good night.